95% of what you do every day is influenced by your subconscious. Your subconscious is home to your memories, your emotions, your beliefs, your habits. So we'll use hypnosis to go uncover, as an arbitrary example, when, why, and how you learned to doubt yourself, to have performance anxiety, to believe you're not worthy of making $1 million. All of the beliefs, the feelings, and the sabotaging behaviors we've discussed so far, they're all learned, which means they can be unlearned. Hypnosis provides the opportunity to uncover the origin point that it was learned, do the work necessary to unlearn it, and then take that energy to build new beliefs, better behaviors that are in line with that next best version of yourself.
This episode is for entertainment and information only. The opinions expressed are not professional advice, and listening does not create a client relationship. Always consult your own qualified professional before making any financial, legal, or health decisions. Welcome back to the Healthy Wealth Experience. I'm your host, Chris Hall, and today we're exploring the most powerful tool in your financial and physical arsenal, your subconscious mind. Joining me is Paul Salter, better known as the Golf Hypnotherapist. Paul has helped over 3,000 high performers, from professional golfers and Olympic athletes to seven-figure entrepreneurs, overcome the self-sabotage that keeps them stuck. This is exactly why I started this podcast, to teach you unique ways of making money by mastering the mental game that drives your results. Today, we're talking about how to reprogram your mind for elite performance on and off the course. Paul, welcome to the show.
Chris, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the introduction and I'm excited. The energy's already strong. Let's dig in.
I like it. Let's go for it. So the first thing I always ask is how did you get into this? You know what I mean? This is not a vocation when you're 8 years old and you're like, I really want to be a hypnotherapist. So tell me a little bit about your background and how you got to where you're at.
Yeah. Candidly, I got into hypnosis and hypnotherapy because I was stuck. I was struggling. And before we get to that point of the story, I've been coaching for 17 years, and really my precipice of coaching, what really pushed me this direction, is I was a multi-sport athlete in high school, but at 16 years old, I was all of about 5'3", 110 pounds soaking wet. Physically, everybody was bigger, stronger, faster. The girls would tower over me. I was so small. So I needed to find some way to stand out and separate myself from my peers. And luckily, my mom raised us well, eating healthy foods consistently. That came fairly naturally. I fell in love with the weight room, so I had no problem putting in the extra work there. But what really sparked my curiosity is, at this time, this is when Michael Jordan was in his prime, Tiger Woods, shortly after Kobe, Roger Federer. Why are all these individuals who more or less practice and train about the same number of hours as their competitors, why are they so much better? And that fascinated me. So I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but as I reflect, I now know that I started to read anything and everything under that umbrella of sports psychology, performance psychology, really trying to understand, how did these athletes think? What did they believe? And that really served as the catalyst into my coaching career. And I started as a sports dietitian. And I was immediately surrounded. I worked at a place called IMG Academy down in Bradenton, Florida, with elite high school athletes, college athletes, pros, Olympic athletes. And what really stood out to me is, despite being a dietitian and being there to educate these individuals on proper fueling and nutrition strategies, they already knew what to do. They just weren't doing it. So it really sparked my curiosity to the next level. Here they are without an information problem. There's just something between their ears, something in their heart that's holding them back from doing it consistently. So as I got away from the professional athlete realm, I spent about a decade helping men and women stuck in that yo-yo dieting cycle. And my approach was sustainable weight loss from the inside out. If we can learn to lose the limiting beliefs, the emotional baggage that's really holding you back, well, losing the 20 or 30 pounds you want to feel your best will be a piece of cake. And it proved successful. It was incredibly effective. Now, here's where things get interesting and personal. I reached a point about 10 years into that journey where I arrived at a fork in the road. I always had this passion for the game of poker. And it was always a dream of mine. One day I'll play professionally. One day I'll go to Vegas all summer and participate in the World Series of Poker. Well, I deep down knew that one day was really code for never, because I was scared. So I finally decided it's now or never. So I committed to playing poker full time. And for 2 years I did. But about 6 months into this journey, I felt as if I'm out studying everybody. I'm out working everybody. I've got the coach. I'm putting in the time. And it still felt like I was lighting money on fire. Not quite ready to give up, Chris. I asked for help. I hired a mindset and performance coach. She happened to be a credentialed hypnotherapist. And in a very short amount of time, I found myself playing for higher stakes, winning more money than I thought possible. But even more importantly, the impact she had on me as an individual was so positively indescribable. I walked away from poker. I phased out the remaining elements of my nutrition coaching, doubled down on the mindset work, got my credential as a hypnotherapist, and I haven't looked back since.
So now when you did the hypnotherapy and you started doing really well at poker, like you would think that you would like sort of like double down on that you would increase and start playing more poker. What part of the shift made you go, oh, I can do anything now. I don't want to do this anymore?
So, candidly, the first reason to answer your question was as much as I love poker, it's not fulfilling for me. I'm born to coach and to teach. So, sitting in a basement, grungy casino, taking other people's money, don't get me wrong, I enjoy it. But I just felt like it wasn't what I was truly meant to do or why I'm here. So, recognizing how powerful of an impact hypnosis had on me, how much I was already leaving a positive impact on my clients, I thought I could do even better. So it just felt like this was the natural evolution of my coaching to really impact people in such a deep, profound way that every habit change or belief we worked on developing would serve them or be alongside them for decades to come. And that excites me when you can have that subtle ripple effect in someone's life and it serves them and their entire ecosystem for decades to come.
So now you're known as the golf hypnotherapist, but if you read just a little bit beyond that, of course, you're helping other people, 7-figure entrepreneurs, Olympic athletes. Why did you get the moniker the golf hypnotherapist?
So I would chalk that up to what I felt was creative niching down, recognizing there was a big need. I started working with a lot of golfers, really a handful at first, through word of mouth referrals. And it dawned on me one day that, wow, the golf industry as a whole, if you're listening, you're a golfer, there's no shortage of what's known as mental golf tips, strategies, material. And for me, I think that's all well and good. It's a collection of surface level tactics, short-term band-aid solutions, breathe, slow down, be positive, have kind self-talk, be present. I think they're all great tools every individual should have in their toolkit, but there's a lot of problems that plague individuals that go below the surface. So this is where I started differentiating between mental game and the mindset of performance and putting it through the golf lens to help these individuals understand, look, like you can know exactly what to do, but if you're not executing when perceived pressure is at its highest or you need all of your potential on demand in the moment, that's not a lack of knowledge problem. Another TikTok or YouTube video or swing thought's not going to help you. It's an identity crisis. There is some form of a belief that you're not deserving, worthy, or capable of this next level of success. And we got to unpack that, get rid of that, and build a better set of beliefs.
That is so fantastic to hear the way that you break it down, because like mechanics, like self-talk, those are all kinds of things. Like, again, before we got on, I told you about my son who is a long snapper and he wants to play Division I football. And, we talk about mindset and self-talk and things like that all the time. But it does feel like sometimes that you're seeing the blocking, right? There's a blocking to it. It's not just the self-talk. There's some, like, again, like maybe like you said, like, I don't deserve this, or, I think they, they call imposter syndrome, where you think like, I don't deserve the recognition that I'm getting, or things like that. Like, I love that you pull the pieces in together, because I think a lot of people really do think, okay, well, I got to work on my self-talk. I got to do my affirmations in the mirror. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that. They absolutely should do that. In fact, I encourage people to write down your affirmations, because it seems to connect the dots even better than just, talking into a mirror. But that is, the hypnotherapy thing is really cool, because again, like there's probably a block somewhere in there that's keeping them from, succeeding, even with all of those swing thoughts and stuff like that.
Yeah. And to add on to the self-talk real, Chris, because you bring up an excellent point. What's so interesting about self-talk is when you look at all the research on confidence, one of the number one predictors of confidence is our self-talk. So people will read that, they'll read up on the research around confidence. Obviously, they know that their negative, harsh, judgmental self-talk isn't serving them. Let me be more positive. The problem many people face is, number one, they do it at the surface level, which again, I like affirmations and mantras too. I think they're a tool that should be utilized. They're just not the end all be all. But number two, so many people shift into being so overly positive. It feels incongruent. It becomes toxic and it just feels out of place. So now you're just really highlighting the incongruency of like deep down, you don't believe you're deserving, worthy, capable, whatever it is. But you're putting on this front. And what I've observed in my years of coaching is sometimes that toxic positivity is a crutch that prevents emotions being felt. And you know as well as I do, men as a whole, we're really good at repressing emotion. We're, and this is generalizing, but emotionally constipated much more than women. So being overly positive is a way to deflect the anger, the shame, the agitation you're feeling. And that just gets further repressed and repressed, which eventually will show back up.
That's emotionally constipated. That is just a classic term that you do not hear very often, but it's so accurate. I love that. So the scarcity bunker, you've worked with professional traders, poker players, golfers. How does a scarcity mentality on the golf course mirror the way people self-sabotage their wealth building efforts in the markets?
Yeah, so we'll run with a golf example, then I'll connect it financially. Golf, let's say you have an individual participating in a tournament, and whether they're flirting with contention or just trying to make the cut and their eyes on the cut line, if they start, 2 under on the front nine and they realize that whatever their immediate goal is well within reach, they start to fear losing that lead. And the reason they are 2 under through nine is that aggressive mentality, that attitude of confidence, conviction, and certainty in every shot in every hole. But when they start to shift their mindset to protecting what they have for fear of losing it, they get tight. They get conservative. And that tightness or that tension is literally the antithesis of the swing they have spent countless hours and thousands of dollars fine tuning. So that is usually a recipe for a blow up. On the poker table, and I experienced this personally, is, let's say a couple hours into a session, you're up a few buy-ins, you feel really good. But if the plan's to play 6, 8, 10 hours and you start to get tight, you start to get conservative. Passivity is the enemy of successful poker. Successful poker necessitates an aggressive mentality that is constantly keeping your foot on the gas. And the same thing can be said then as we bring it full circle to whether it's investing or entrepreneurship. You always need to have your guardrails and your systems that help you go through your own unique decision-making process. But at some point, if you really let fear step into the driver's seat of determining which risk you take and you don't take, and you become too passive in your strategy, you start tightening up, fearful of what it is you've already earned, you're slowly going to bleed it away. And again, that's generalizing, but that's typically what happens. And usually it happens beneath conscious awareness because you feel in the moment you're doing the right thing to protect what you've earned. And that just limits your potential.
So it's like a self-limiting belief. Like, so in poker or in entrepreneurship, it's kind of like you're almost creating an actor, a character that doesn't win, that can't take these chances, that, needs to play it safe. It's almost like they're telling themselves a story that that's a person that I am not.
Yeah, so look at invisible ceiling. So the psychological term is actually the upper limit problem. And is this unconscious self-imposed limitation as to how much, whether it be money, success, attention, or love that you can experience. And it's placed upon you as a result of your own unique childhood and life experience that's directly related to a core belief you have about yourself. Am I worthy and deserving of this amount of money per month, per quarter, per year? And if you don't believe with your nervous system fully on board that you're not, the moment you get close to crossing that threshold or the moment you taste it, that's when your subconscious gets incredibly creative to deploy all these sneaky forms of self-sabotage, because that next level of success is not safe. Your subconscious has one goal: keep you safe. Anytime you start stepping out of the comfort zone, red flags, alarm bells go off, and subtly and significantly, all of these sabotaging behaviors bring you back to what's familiar, which is having your goal just out of reach.
And I feel like sometimes I see it with people as well, that they specifically shoot for really low bar goals because they know they can achieve them, but it's like there's no threat to them. Then there's self.
Yeah, that's that word threat is so critical. You're absolutely right. And then two, what I found, I'm curious on your insight too, like in all my years, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of embarrassment, everybody's well versed in those. But what happens with this upper limit problem more often than not is fear of success. because it's such a transformation when you think about who you need to become to cross into that next level of success. It invites in perceived pressure, expectation, responsibility, imposter syndrome you missed earlier. Was it a fluke I had this success? Am I lucky? Can I sustain it? And the thought of having to become that next version is so foreign and distant that it's a threat. It's not worth fully going in there. Our ego jumps in, our subconscious wants to bring us back to, again, what's familiar, what's comfortable, what's safe.
Yeah. So fear of flying, fear of soaring, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think we all do that. Right. And I've been coming through, on my own stuff. One of the things I have limiting beliefs, and, it's like, I'm, fairly successful at what I do. And so, it's like, well, how could you have limiting beliefs? It's like, okay, well, let me explain it to you. Right. So I manage a good amount of money in my financial practice. I have a couple other successful businesses that run almost on their own and generate wealth. I own real estate. I have, pretty good resume. But the thing is then you look, and it's not a matter of like comparison. Like, I don't compare myself, but like you look at like an Elon Musk or, a Trump or someone like that, and you see like the billions and billions and billions of dollars, and you realize that like I do have a limiting belief. My limiting belief is that I can't be a billionaire because I don't do things, and I don't project myself in a way, and I do all the things that I'm doing professionally and successfully to be at this level, but I don't do the things that professionally and things that I need to do to target this level. And of course you can't see me if you're on audio podcast, but I'm putting my hands below my chin and then I'm putting my hands above my head to give you an idea of like, we all have a spot that we think we should sit in, whether our parents told us where it was or would we tell us ourselves. Again, like if you look at me and my family, like I grew up pretty poor, hand-me-down clones, things like that. And so in my family, like my level of success has kind of been unheard of at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like, as a dad, I'm like looking at my kids being like, hey, I'm paving the way, but you can do even better. But then I had to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment, if you will, about that. Like, well, what about me? Like, you know what I mean? Why am I'm successful where I'm at, but why shouldn't I go try to become a billionaire? Why shouldn't I start putting things in place to make me a multi-millionaire? Because, before Elon Musk had PayPal, he wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't even a billionaire. So
you bring up a really good point, Chris. And I'm so happy that you shared that, because a lot of people listening will resonate with that. And what you address without explicitly stating it is this undercurrent of tension that's related to the strain that could potentially be created on the relationships of your inner circle. And I'm going to generalize, and I don't want to tell your story for you, but if I could take many client stories and fit it into the mold you describe, where they come from a low income family and suddenly they're the generational change maker, but blazing a completely new trail. Most of us still forget that at our core as human beings, we're a tribal species. Centuries and centuries ago, if you were rejected or abandoned by your tribe, you literally died. And although we don't have the same saber-toothed tiger or starvation threats that we did back then, it's still a visceral threat to our nervous system. So if your peer group is used to making X amount of money or is addicted to bad habits A, B, and C, and you suddenly want to change course, it opens up the opportunity for resentment, for envy, for stress, for tension, for jealousy. And because you're so used to being wired to connect, that tension and that envy and jealousy that your peer group experiences can potentially be strong enough to force you to dim your light once more and fall back onto the bad behaviors that keep you feeling like you belong to that group in the first place.
That's really insightful, because I feel like, people know the positive side of that. They know that if I spend time with these 5 people, I can pretty much gauge where I'm going to be in 2 years. But so they think that as a positive way, but like, I guess they don't really like, and we do think of it as a negative way too, right? If we're out with people who just want to like, get drunk or, like do drugs or like, just kind of like always be on or whatever, not self-aware, just having fun all the time kind of thing. Like you're going to end up, doing that. It's going to definitely limit your ability to be successful in other realms. But I don't think that people pay as much attention to why they do it. Like, like I'm in this group and, I'm comfortable with this group. And it's like, you realize like what you're saying is you're comfortable in this group because there is safety in like the numbers, if you will, of not being like uberly successful. Like I can be at this level and there's no pressure on me.
So well said. Yeah, I think you summarized that incredibly well. And you see it on a macro level, but even the micro level. Like some of my amateur golfers that are, kind of the weekend warriors, they're business owners, entrepreneurs, but they've got their regular buddies they play with. And they're telling me, I want to, drop my handicap, shoot better scores. And I start to get a picture of where they are in their group. And I'm like, oh, you're used to being like the middleman. Like you don't ever shoot a score that surprises anyone, but you never play so bad that you get laughed off the course. You're safe being the guy who shoots, between 90 and 95 consistently. But the thought of going low, breaking 90, breaking 80 is such a threat to your identity, because now all of a sudden you'd be the A player, all eyes on you, that pressure, you continue to get in your way unconsciously just to maintain that identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I played in a lot of foursomes, and that definitely plays out. Anybody who's ever been in a tournament at a foursome, we walk up, we kind of look at each other, like size each other up, like, okay, yeah, you're going to be the guy who leads us. I'm going to contribute. This guy, we're just gonna we're just gonna have fun today, that kind of thing. So
I'm so happy you shared that, and I won't get us too far off a tangent, but for you listening right now, how would your friends describe you? How would your peers, your employer, employees describe you? Because Chris, you said something so important that like, oh, I'm just the fun guy, or I always, I'm just the nice guy, or I'm not athletic. Every single one of us has a story about our identity that we've created or we've let other people create and write for us. And all the work I do is rooted in identity change. Our identity is a collection of our beliefs, our self-talk, and our habits. And it put together, it just tells a story. So are you the nice guy? Are you the person who just enough to get by? Are you the overachiever who grinds and grinds and grinds for the sake of doing the work, but you don't do the meaningful work that moves the needle? So if you're listening, I would really encourage you to reflect on how are you known amongst your peer group, your employer, your team members, and what's the story that you tell yourself about your identity in that? And is that the story you want to continue to write for the next couple of years?
Yeah. So that brings me to a thought that I have. And again, this is in my particular life where, for me growing up, I didn't have a dad. I had a lot of obviously trauma from that. At the time, I didn't think I had any trauma from it. I was just a kid growing up. But, you get older and you realize about fear of abandonment, things like that. And I know that one of the reasons that I am successful the way I am is because I have had, some of those drivers, like some of those things that's like, I want to prove to people that, again, this doesn't necessarily relate now, but does relate into the idea of like, I want to prove that I was worthy of being your kid or whatever, like those kinds of things. And so for me, that's been a real driving factor. It's like, it drove me when I was in football to be like the best. I wanted to like prove that I was the best at that. It drove me in business, like every job I've ever had. Like, I'm not just like, hey, I want to do good in this job. It's like, nah, I want to be the best salesman you have. I want to be the best podcaster if I can be, with new studio right now, new equipment, just constantly trying to be better and better and better. And those are the things that drive me. What about people who kind of live in a fluffy life, right? So, and again, like I love my kids. I'm just trying to say like my kids have lived in a pretty fluffy life. They've been very well loved by both their parents. Now we're currently divorced, but for the most part of their lifetime, we were together and it was a loving family. And then of course, even when we separated, we did a really good job of, in my opinion, separating. So like my kids don't have like any of that like angst that I grew up with. And so how do people motivate themselves when they don't have those like, to me, it's like that was a weakness, right? A weakness was that I was sort of abandoned as a child, but like it became a strength. And so like, how do you take, like when you don't have those kinds of things, how do you like fabricate like the story to tell yourself like, I'm going to go get this stuff anyway?
Well, so here's an interesting point that might not be what you expected is I wouldn't be surprised if your kids have their own story of challenge and hardship. And I'm not saying you don't see that, but what I'm getting at is sometimes when we think back about these challenges and hardships we're forced to endure during childhood, we throw in the word trauma a lot in this type of work. And some people go as far as saying like big T trauma, which is the obvious abuse, sexual assault, rape, all of those horrendous crimes. And then there's more of like the little T trauma. They're just like still obvious challenges, divorce, separation being one of the big ones. But what I'm getting at is something as subtle as a passive remark from a friend or an offhand comment can be trauma to somebody, can be a enough to set in motion the development of a protective mechanism. It could be the pathway of when a belief in a set of accompanying behaviors is formed. So I say that to say somebody can have the very fluffy, cushy life, incredibly well loved, supported, their needs met. But where they'll start to find resistance is in they still go through challenges. Again, we as a parent or somebody else looking from the outside will never know the extent of them. But B, the vast majority of people I talk to cannot definitively answer the question, what do you want? They'll spend hours telling you everything they don't want. So when you start to really help someone who's destined to move forward, reach their potential, but it kind of feels like they've never been challenged, as the coach, the lead, the mentor, this is where the opportunity to dig in and play the game of 1,000 candid questions comes into play, to really push someone, because it's possible, and I've seen this play out in many situations, where every need was so well provided growing up that individual never learned the skill of thinking for him or herself. They never learned to develop the trust muscle to determine, you know what? Mom and dad always wanted this for me. I actually fucking hate it. Actually, I don't know if I can cuss on your show. Should have asked.
That's
My
fine.
bad. But it's learning autonomy. It's learning to rebuild your relationship with yourself, to be true and authentic to, this is what I want, regardless of what everybody else wants for me. And that opens up a whole new pathway of opportunity to dig in and unlearn what hasn't served them or won't serve them moving forward.
Yeah. How do you, so like when you meet with people, like how do you get like most of your referrals, or, like, I mean, do you have, I know it sounds really crazy. Like, do you have a Google listing and that's where you get most of your patients from? Or it's like, is it shows like this that drive people to you? Like, where do you, because we talked a little bit off the air and I definitely want to mention it. There's this real bias towards hypnotherapy. Like the minute you say hypnotherapy, you're like, oh my gosh, like this guy, what's he going to talk about? That's a woo woo, that's another thing. But I feel like, if you say like prayer and meditation, people go, oh yeah, it's fine. No problem. So prayer and meditation is basically the same, like kind of like the same kind of like composition of your body and your mental state. And just the difference is that you have somebody speaking life into you. That's the way I would put it. But how do you deal with the bias that you see, and how do you get your clients?
Yeah, so I'll go to the bias first, and you break the bias through education. Like most people, you're right. They hear hypnosis. Oh, is this dude going to pull out a pocket watch? Is he going to get me to cluck like a chicken? Am I going to put Chris to sleep? Because their mind instantly goes to the cruise ship, the comedy show, the high school graduation where they saw that. And not to take away from those individuals, it is hypnosis. It's just completely unlike anything I do with my clients. So the education first starts with what hypnosis is not. It's not magic. It's not mind control. It's not brainwashing. You're awake, alert, conscious, in control every step of the way. Like you alluded to, most people don't recognize hypnosis as a natural state of mind. Like you listening right now, you've likely been in hypnosis 3 to 5 times already today. It's just a fancy word to characterize the type of brainwave you're primarily producing, known as theta brainwave. It's the same state of mind you're in when you transition from sleeping to waking those first couple of minutes, when you're caught up in your favorite book, podcast, TV show, or where you're so deeply immersed in a project or on the golf course, you find that flow state. All of those are periods of hypnosis. So I just simply state that to reiterate how natural, safe, and familiar it is. But then the opportunity, when we go into hypnosis intentionally, this is really where, the so-called magic happens. Because number one, in that hypnotic state, every single high achiever listening, you, me, we all have that harsh inner critic, that judgmental voice that says, Paul, you suck. Chris, you can't do this. Chris, stop trying. So we're able to quiet all of that nonsense and negativity. And then number two, you're able to connect with your subconscious mind. 95% of what you do every day is influenced by your subconscious. Your subconscious is home to your memories, your emotions, your beliefs, your habits. So we'll use hypnosis to go uncover, as an arbitrary example, when, why, and how you learned to doubt yourself, to have performance anxiety, to believe you're not worthy of making $1 million. All of the beliefs, the feelings, and the sabotaging behaviors we've discussed so far, they're all learned, which means they can be unlearned. Hypnosis provides the opportunity to uncover the origin point that it was learned, do the work necessary to unlearn it, and then take that energy to build new beliefs, better behaviors that are in line with that next best version of yourself.
Yeah. The way that I think about hypnosis is, and the way I think I read this one, so I didn't figure out this out on my own, but it was like when you're driving to go pick your kids up from school, or you're going to get to the next work, but you've got something on your mind, and you're running that through your mind. And then you kind of look down and you're like, wow, how did I get here? Like, I don't even remember driving here. I just know that I was driving. And that is a state of hypnosis, because your software is kind of running the show now, and you're not actively like, I'm going to take a left turn and I'm going to go 35 miles per hour. And so that's the way I always thought about. So, and to kind of go to your point is, we all have software that runs all the time. And sometimes we're actively, picking files to run. Like you said, 95% of the time that software is running without us. Mm-hmm. And it's based on things we've been told. And so when you talk about hypnotherapy, to me, what I'm hearing is that you're going to go in and you're just recoding part of that software. Does that seem like an accurate way of describing that?
Bingo. And I'll go one step further to complement that great analogy is, I alluded to like performance anxiety is a big one. So that's a learned feeling state and accompanying set of behaviors. So the way that we would approach that is, if you think about a memory, like a Microsoft Word document or a Google Doc. Through hypnosis, we can go uncover that moment in fourth grade where you had to give a presentation in front of the class and you forgot your lines or whatever it is. You peed your pants, your classmates laughed at you, your teacher laughed at you. It was humiliating, embarrassing. We're afraid to speak in public ever since. If you think of your memory like a Microsoft Word document, through hypnosis, it's almost like we can retrieve that document, open it up, rewrite it, take a lot of the emotion out of it, reframe it, and then put it back in where it belongs. That is a positive ripple effect all the way up until and through the present moment. So that memory doesn't carry the same emotional charge that it used to. So we've broken that bond, which creates an abundance of energy that's now available to build a new belief and set of behaviors around public speaking that allows you to present yourself composed, confident, and with conviction.
Can you give an example of something that where someone was like a seven-figure entrepreneur and they just couldn't break a limit, and then you were able to dive in there and kind of like unwind that for them?
Absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite stories, this is of my client, Amber. So Amber bounced around the foster care system for many, many years. And when she finally found an adoptive mother and father, these are my words, not hers, they were not the cream of the crop, to say the least. They were verbally, emotionally, even physically abusive at times, especially the father. So she unfortunately experienced a lot of abuse bouncing from one foster home to the next. Kind of like we talked about earlier, though. She developed such a tenacity and ambition in a work ethic to get herself out of these situations. She went on to start an incredible business that was thriving and going and going. Yet what we uncovered as she was trying to push to the next level is she started a new venture where she needed to raise capital. And as you can imagine, and everybody listening can imagine, most of these conversations in which she needed to raise capital came with older, wealthy men. Well, every perceived father figure in her life to date had physically harmed her or treated her unfairly. And her default response to those situations was to become a shell of herself, to play small, get quiet, get passive. So we started to notice a pattern in which that began to show up in these conversations. And she was leaving these rooms and these conversations without a deal, without any money, until we were able to connect the dots, go back and do some of the deep work to help her take her power back, so that in these situations, she was the one that was to be desired. This opportunity was a gift to them. She commanded conversations. She maintained authority, power, and congruency every step of the way. And she actually just emailed me, I kid you not, last week saying she just secured another $6 million investment for this latest venture. And that's incredibly exciting because who she has showed up in these rooms and conversations, night and day from the woman I first met.
Okay. And how long does something like that take? I mean, is that like one session, or is it like 10 sessions? Is it something where you have to meet once a week or twice a week? Or kind of give us an idea? I'm assuming it's different for every single person, but like averagely speaking, like how many sessions do people have to meet with you before they start seeing progress?
Yeah, it's a great question that I always like to lead answering with. Number one, I will never overpromise and underdeliver. And I always just try to be as candid as possible. So it could be as little as one session to have that big breakthrough. I mean, you do any type of deep personal development work, you inevitably come across Tony Robbins. You're one choice, one commitment, one action away from a better life. I've personally experienced it. I've watched thousands of clients experience it. However, However, with that said, typically what happens is on our very first call together, I'm doing the game of 1,000 questions, digging into early childhood, adolescence, and whatnot, so I can begin to build our roadmap and list of priorities. That first block could take one session, could take 3 sessions. It depends just how deeply ingrained it is. Typically, though, 1 to 3 calls, if you tell me you struggle mightily with X, Y, and Z, procrastination, perfectionism, performance anxiety, feelings I'm not enough, in a handful of calls, we will make incredible, meaningful progress. Nothing is ever completely erased, gone for good. As you continue to go and grow, though, your awareness and your ability to diffuse the emotion from those previous triggers grows stronger and stronger, and you're able to move forward. But typically, a handful of sessions per challenge, and I'll stop talking in a moment to let you jump in. But what we find, Chris, is a lot of these challenges are so interconnected. It all comes back down to the core beliefs we have about ourselves. Am I worthy? Am I deserving? Am I capable? So all of that to say, I typically work in packages of 10 calls that allows us an ample bandwidth to do what's most important, and that's to apply and integrate the great work that we do during hypnosis so that it becomes significant and sustainable.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned Tony Robbins and self-limiting beliefs, and I think that's spot on for like a lot of what we're missing when we're looking for things that why is this broken in my life? It's usually, based off of some self-limiting belief. Like you're knee deep in this every single day. I'm going to put you on the spot just a little tiny bit here. And of course, you have time to answer. You don't have to answer right off the cusp. But what is a self-limiting belief that you currently carry with you after all these years of still doing work for yourself?
That's a great question. Candidly, I think I don't have a golf background. I played golf in high school with my buddies. So that, you could put that to what kind of golf that looked like. And then I didn't touch golf clubs for 16 years. So I still do a lot of good reflection and journaling around, like, I don't have to be a scratch golfer or a mini tour player to help professional golfers or aspiring professional golfers. As I pivoted and started niching down with golfers, that was something I ran up against quite a bit. And what helped me begin the path of breaking free with that is one of my mentors, Elliot Rowe. He is the guy in the poker mindset and performance space. I say this jokingly with all seriousness, Elliot sucks at poker, but he has helped all of the top poker players amass hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in every single bracelet and championship you could ever imagine achieving in poker. So that helped me understand, like, I just need to be a master at my craft. And my craft is getting the most out of you, helping you unlearn and let go of what's not serving you. But I'd be lying if I said I still don't from time to time. I host a podcast called the Scratch Golfer's Mindset Podcast. I have aspirations to be a scratch golfer. I know I will be there, but sometimes I have to really reset and kind of let those waves of emotion that come from that belief just run their course, redirect, and then move forward.
So now that sparks something in my brain. My current mode is very geared towards tax planning. So because of what you do, are you able to write off in your business? Are you able to write off your golf lessons and your golf stuff because of what you do for a living?
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
What a great idea. I think people who want to do those things, IRS says, it's reasonable, it's a reasonable expense. And there's a couple other parameters that go with it. But basically, like if you're teaching people like the mindset of golfing, it makes sense that you should be at least golfing a little bit, like not necessarily be good at it, but to be out there. So it makes sense that it would be reasonable for you to be good at your job to know a little bit about it. So.
Yeah. And I always tell myself too, and maybe this could be a belief that needs to be released. I think it's actually empowering me right now, is like, if someone's a single digit scratch golfer, they're clearly a high performer in more than just one area of life. Those are the people I want to spend time with. So the better I become, the more doors that are open to me to connect with people that light me up, that I just fully feel invigorated and refreshed after spending time with. Like, that's how I want to live my life, with those people.
Yeah. That's good. When it comes to like poker, or when it comes to like just business in general, we have a tendency to get into like an emotional tilt. Like if we're in poker, it's really easy. We get a bad hand. We can just that can just ruin the whole thing. Or sometimes we might as well just get up and walk away. But in business, you can't always do that, but you can still go an emotional tilt, right? A client calls and they kind of chew you out about something that you thought you were doing that was like really good for them and they didn't like it. You try to like prospect this certain person and you're sure that you have exactly what they need and they're like, I'm fine. And maybe you took it too personal or whatever. But the end of the story is like everybody goes on emotional tilt, even the coolest, calmest people. I like to consider myself very even keeled, but I've been on emotional tilt before, and I'm sure I'll be on emotional tilt in the future at some point. How do you get out of that? What's a easy way to kind of like immediately recognize what you're doing and sort of like move on from it?
Biasly having a coach helps eliminate a lot of that.
Sure.
Whether it's a coach, whether you call it a business coach, a niche specific coach, if real estate investing, financial planning, or a mindset coach. So the coaching helps tremendously. But two, I often come back to you need to have structure and systems, because the systems and structure you create help prevent some emotion from hijacking the steering wheel of your day decisions and actions. And within that structure, you need to have a reflection process. And this can be at the end of a week, some type of consistency and cadence. But going one step further, Chris, for me, it looks like, and this is what I teach my clients, a daily practice of silence and solitude, because there are so many bits of information and sources competing for our attention every single day. It's very easy to get pulled in 1,000 directions off of our charted path from who we need to be and where we want to go. And that can allow emotional hijacking to take place, that it can allow anger to step into the driver's seat and to drive for a couple hours or a couple of days. And that can be incredibly destructive depending on who you are and what decisions you make or do not make. But 10-minute silence practice, and you can call this journaling. You can call it meditation. You can do breath work. You can cold plunge. Just sitting, being, and shutting up without distraction allows you to connect, whether you call it your intuition, your highest self, whatever it is, with you, authentic you, to quiet the noise. And I think when you develop a practice like that, in those moments, it becomes increasingly aware of how you've been letting anxiety, fear, or anger run the show. And it allows you to quickly course correct moving forward.
That's really good advice. I would say that anytime I feel like a little bit lost in my purpose, that it usually stems from me not knowing, doing the daily things to like, oh, okay, this is who I want to be. I want to be successful in business. I want to be successful in my relationships. I want to be successful in my health. And you kind of start going out, like writing down in the journal or whatever, like these are the things I want, or these are the things I am, or whatever. But just reminding yourself that you have a guideline, that you have things that you've built into your system. So that's excellent advice.
Let me add one more
thing. I will tell you,
you sparked a great idea. A lot of us high performers, high achievers, we have got some type A OCD tendencies. Again, they're superpowers until they're not. But what I'm getting at is oftentimes it's very easy to remain stuck in our heads and try to think our way through certain challenges. But we're emotional beings. So we've got to learn to get back into our body. So you alluded to it, those daily self-care routines, rituals, movement. I like the cold plunge. I mean, there's no better way to go inward as soon as possible than jumping into 40-degree water. But something that allows you to get back into your body and to turn your mind off for a few minutes, that's what really, in my opinion, helps reset and allow the opportunity to get back on track.
Yeah. It's funny because I was thinking when you said cold plunge the first time, I'm like, I can't think of anything other than just trying to breathe.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm just like, I can't think of any of my goals at the moment. I'm just like 4-second breaths. That's it. Just trying to get that through. So you're an endurance athlete, right?
I've done endurance events. I do not identify as an endurance athlete. I do it for the sick, twisted mindset benefit I get on the other end.
And that I was going to say, like, when you're in an endurance event, like, how do you build that physical resilience and that mental resilience, the mental toughness to stay the course when you're just like, it's so far, the finish line is so far away? Because to me, that also correlates to business, right? A lot of times we have these business goals and maybe they're so far away. So how do you just slog it out, I guess is the question.
Curiosity and very short-term goal setting. So for me, the one that comes to mind is I ran 50 miles, but what was unique about this was it was overnight. It was out a mile and a half on a paved road and turn around. So it's basically this 3 mile loop, but it's not even a scenic loop. It's just out and back, out and back. And, I did well the first 20, 24 miles, easy piece of cake, whatever. And as the night wore on, I'm starting to grow tired because we didn't start until like 10:30 at night. It's like, okay, if I can just run to that tree and then I'll reset. If I can just make it to that bench, it started a little bigger. It was like, just do this next loop, check and see how you feel. Just run out to the 1.5 mile marker, check in how you feel. But the longer I got, and mental and physical and emotional fatigue began to set in, the smaller my goals got. And it was almost like a way like, hey, if you just get it through to this point, you can then give yourself a chance to evaluate if you want to walk, take a break, whatever it is. But it was like every time I hit that milestone, I got a little hit of dopamine. Like, no, I can keep going. I'll do one more. So I started to play that game over and over again. And the same thing is directly applicable to business. You might have this grand goal of writing a book, for instance, or opening a second location, hiring a new team. Okay, maybe you have a list of 10 things that need to be done. Can you go even more granular to get the one thing off your list first? What 3 micro steps need to be taken? A conversation with Melissa. I need to have a partnership with so-and-so. But the smaller you can go, what ends up happening is you start to build momentum. We all love that feeling of writing down a to-do list and checking the box or crossing it off. And when we can do that on a slightly bigger level that goes and grows, and we begin to feel and see meaningful progress, that's the type of upward spiral that we want to be stuck in.
Right. Okay. I like the upward spiral. That's good. We don't want to talk about upward spirals very often.
Yeah.
So tell me about the fear jar. Okay. This is something you talk about: core fears, judgment, abandonment, rejection. So for the entrepreneurs listening, how does the fear of judgment from peers actually act as a tax on their potential earnings?
Yeah, it comes back to that. You're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And, if you and your current peer group currently make, plus or minus $1,000, $10,000, and, money is something that's very important to you. And maybe we go as far as this income and impact, and you have these desires to play bigger, to no longer be the big fish in the small pond and to enter the bigger pond as the small fish. Well, you might not be welcome back in the small pond you used to hang out a lot in, because you might come across as, I'm better than you, or I'm doing bigger things. It could be condescending. It could be taken the wrong way. Or again, like I alluded to earlier, your friends might become jealous, envious, resentful, and that strains what were once very important supportive relationships in your life. So you know it as well as I do. The higher we go up the ladder of success, the more lonely it is likely to become. And I personally have found that one of the hardest yet necessary components of continuing to climb that ladder is editing or eliminating relationships that were once important relationships to us. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be significant others, it can be direct, immediate family, it can be friends, peers, business partners. But at the end of the day, you are the only person who has to deal with the consequences of your decisions. And by continuing to play small, put other people's feelings above your own, you build resentment towards yourself, towards that person. So I once heard, I believe it was John Delaney who said this quote, but he was talking about this context, and he says, choose guilt over resentment. You can cut off or edit a relationship and feel guilty. That's a natural part of the human experience. But by choosing not to, you just build resentment. So guilty, okay, it still sucks. Let's not take away from that. But guilt is easier to move on from than just this undercurrent of resentment that gradually builds because you put other people's feelings above your own dreams and desires.
What can they do to kind of like start themselves and go, okay, I need to get out of this fear jar?
Well, so let's use the relationships first for a moment. Is really like, think about the people you spend the most time with. How do you feel after? Do you feel drained? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel annoyed, agitated, angry? Or do you feel inspired, like ready to tackle your goals? So even just planting a seed of curiosity as you're listening right now on, you just spent time with so-and-so, or you walked out of the meeting here. If that's not a better version of you walking out, and generally speaking, it's not going to happen every time, but if that's not a better feeling or version of you, that should give you some pause. Do you need to spend that much time with that people? Then secondly, everybody listening knows what to do to achieve their goal, whatever their unique goal is, professionally and personally. And maybe there's some knowledge gaps that exist here and there. Guess what? Google and ChatGPT are incredibly freaking helpful. So as you're listening to me and you know your goal, you know 90% of what you need to do, it's a really great moment to lean into that silence and ask yourself, why am I not doing what I need to be doing? And asking yourself over and over and over, inevitably your verbiage will begin to answer that question with, well, I'm afraid to, or I'm scared of. And that is where the opportunity to further reflect and unpack will go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I really think that's helpful for people. What is, like, we're getting kind of near the end of the thing. So what is something that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
I think it's really awesome that you brought up earlier this, through childhood experience, a tenacity, ambition, and work ethic can be born that is so incredibly powerful. It creates an opportunity to change the course of, familial wealth, generational wealth, whatever it may be. What I spend a lot of time on with my clients is helping them when their superpower, and this always happens, inevitably becomes their kryptonite. So for example, the entrepreneur, the leader, the owner listening right now who wears that grinder mentality like a badge of honor. I can put in 70, 80-hour weeks, no problem. Cool. It is probably a necessary component of your story. It cannot be the theme of your entire story, because we could have all of the conversations that are around emotional burnout, overwhelm, being just psychologically drained. But what ends up happening are two big issues that arise. Number one is you begin to place your worth, your esteem into your results. 9 times out of 10, you can't control your income, your clients, the number of products that are ordered. But if you base your self-worth and esteem on something beyond your control, candidly, that is just not a way to live life. You are in for a very challenging period of time. Second to that is the inability to slow down. Like, it's great to have all of the money in the world, to have the marriage, to have the kids, but if you're never present, if you're incredibly disconnected with your husband or wife, if you have barely a relationship with your children because every email, every ping, every ding is treated like a fire in an emergency, again, we're a tribal species. We're not meant to be alone. That's why, like, capital punishment in our country is literally like isolation, no contact with human beings. We are wired for connectivity and community. And if you have let that superpower of tenacity and work ethic bring you to a place where you struggle to slow down and disconnect, allow that to be a real red flag. It is not a sustainable recipe to continue to experience the success you've had.
Yeah. Let's explore the flip side of that. So let's explore the flip side of that, where you have been a grinder, you have been, very motivated, you told yourself and your friends, nobody will outwork me, and then you get to a certain amount of success and you basically kind of start ramping it down. Then you have this is that a good thing that you've ramped it down? Is it a bad thing that you've ramped it down? Is it more of like you do a better job of balancing? And now you're either all in or an all out guy. So kind of like, I would say that some people have that same problem, but in reverse, right? So they get to a certain level of success and they're like, okay, then they just start shutting down all the things they did to get there.
I don't like the word balance. I'll tell you what I like better. I like alignment. So, and I hope this answers what you're asking. Tell me if it doesn't. But when it comes to alignment, when many people have that success and they realize, I very much want a significant other, I want a family, and it's the question of like, this is an impossible puzzle. How can I have a thriving business, a thriving marriage, and a thriving, relationship with my kids? The answer is not balance, it's honesty. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, it's honest communication with yourself. What do you want? What is a priority to you? I'm divorced. I used to tell my ex-wife all the time, no, babe, you're the most important thing to me. Bullshit. My business was, and I was just afraid to admit it. I wasn't honest with myself, and therefore it created incongruency and resentment in the relationship. So when I come back to alignment, you've got to be clear on what you want. And then you've got to honestly communicate that with the potential partner or your current significant other, because you need him or her on the same page, period. Then you can have that layer and level of communication with your children. And when you set expectations honestly and everybody's on the same page, you can have it all. No problem. And it might look like during different seasons, you're 80% more over here and 20% here. You can put numbers on it. But as long as the expectation is set, clearly communicated, and there's consistent reflection on how it's serving the team, in this case, the family dynamic, you can be aligned and have a thriving business, marriage, and relationship with your kids.
Yeah, I think that what you said there was so good for people to hear. Also, it reminded me the dynamic of people who do get divorced. And you see this like, okay, they went through this like crisis and now they've like got the car. It's like, oh, a midlife crisis, all the different things like that. And based on what you're saying, one of the things that I'm hearing is it's not necessarily that they're in a midlife crisis as much as that they've spent years and years and years choosing other people. And then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? I'm going to do something nice for me. And then that comes off like a midlife crisis, but it really just comes like to become, again, more aligned. One of the things that I took away from my last relationship, my marriage, and I brought it into my new relationship is that I try really hard to not go like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Because then you get into this mode of like constantly like, kowtowing to someone else's needs. And again, if you love somebody, is the word kowtowing correct? I don't know. But I can tell you that you need to be true to yourself. You need to, so like what I started doing just with my kids even, like it used to be like, go, hey, do you guys want some lunch? And they text me back and they'd be like, I want In-N-Out Burger. Okay, cool. Which is a West Coast chain in case you don't know what that is. And the other one would be, I want a Chipotle. You know what I mean? So like me being the good guy that I was, I would literally go to both places and I would find out what I want to eat from both of those. Well, it took me a long time to figure it out, but finally I was like, listen, I'm going to go to In-N-Out Burger. Shout out to In-N-Out Burger. I'm going to go to In-N-Out Burger. Do you guys want anything? And then so I took that stance of like instead of like, what do you want? What do you want? It was like, hey, this is the thing that I want, but I'm willing to include you in it. And I do think that that's something that happens to people when they get divorced. I do think that they go like, wow, I've really spent a lot of my life making sure someone else was happy who maybe was never happy. So now the only person you could really truly make happy is you. And so I think that's a really good example of, trying to make sure that you are true to yourself and your alignment. So I like the word alignment. That was good. So, well, we've kind of come to near the end of our thing here. I'm going to throw a couple things out there to the group. If you enjoyed this at all, please make sure to comment, like, and share. I tell people it's a joke, but I like it. It's a good long running joke that I'm going to do forever, which is my mom checks my subscribers. So please make sure you subscribe so she can be proud of me. That's important to me and her. As far as like the stuff that we're talking about, Paul would love to answer your questions. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'll make sure to tag him in them. And then we can make sure to answer those questions for you. What's the easiest way to get a hold of you, Paul?
Follow me on Instagram at the Paul Salter. I'm on there. That's where I live primarily from a social aspect.
Yeah, I think that's where I found you. Yeah. So yeah, that's great. You guys, this is great stuff. Reach out to Paul, see what he's working on with you. Everybody, every single one of us, including myself, we all have limiting beliefs. We all have things that are programmed into our software. And so, you know what? What have you got to lose? So why not try it? Paul, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being on the show. And I look forward to hearing more good stories down the road.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Chris. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.